December 16, 1944, began like any other bitter winter day in the Ardennes. Snow blanketed the dense forests, muffling footsteps and concealing the deadly presence of the enemy. Yet beneath the quiet beauty lay a storm of destruction waiting to erupt. For one young American soldier, Francis A. Morgan, fresh from training and thrust into the heart of the conflict, the day would mark the beginning of an ordeal that would push him beyond human limits. The German army had launched its last desperate offensive, the Ardennes counteroffensive, later to be remembered as the Battle of the Bulge. Tanks rolled silently through the woods, artillery fire split the sky, and snow-covered villages became instant graveyards. The soldiers' unit had been ordered to hold a series of defensive positions along a crucial crossroads, a junction the Germans desperately needed to capture to split the Allied forces. With only basic gear, a rifle, limited ammunition, and a meager ration pack, he trudged through knee-deep snow, every step exhausting his already drained muscles. The bitter wind cut through his uniform, freezing exposed skin within seconds. Each breath was a cloud of frost that lingered in the air, mingling with the smoke of distant gunfire. The forest itself seemed alive with menace, every shadow a potential threat, every crack of a branch signaling impending danger. Within hours, the first shells rained down on his position. Artillery fire shook the earth, sending snow and splintered tree limbs into the air. The soldier instinctively hit the ground, his rifle pressed to his shoulder, scanning for movement. Enemy patrols moved with deadly precision, testing the defenses and probing for weaknesses. The young soldier engaged his first firefight, adrenaline surging as he squeezed the trigger. The sharp crack of the rifle echoed through the trees, accompanied by the distant screams of men struck by shrapnel. He could feel the fear gnawing at him, but training and survival instinct drove him forward. By midday, the first casualties had already occurred. Comrades he had shared jokes with during brief moments of calm were now lying still, faces pale beneath the snow. The soldier moved among the wounded, applying first aid when he could, dragging the incapacitated to cover. Time became meaningless. Minutes stretched into hours, and every second brought the threat of death closer. Communications were chaotic. Orders shouted through the blizzard were barely audible above the cacophony of artillery, gunfire, and screaming. Yet his unit adapted quickly, moving in small squads, establishing improvised positions, and using fallen trees and snowdrifts as cover. The weather compounded the nightmare. The snow was not merely cold, it was a constant enemy. Boots sank into icy drifts, weapons became slick with frost, and fingers grew numb from holding the rifle. The soldier's stomach ached from hunger. Rations were limited, and every bite of cold, dry bread was a bitter reminder of the relentless environment. Exhaustion was already settling in, but there was no time to rest. Nightfall brought an even more terrifying reality. Darkness that obscured enemy movements and amplified every sound. The distant thump of artillery, the crunch of snow under boots, and the occasional crack of a rifle created an atmosphere of constant tension. Sleep was impossible. Even when he closed his eyes for brief seconds, the cold and noise forced him awake, heart racing. During the first night, the soldier witnessed acts of courage and terror alike. A squad mate braved enemy fire to rescue a wounded comrade. Another soldier fell silently to a sniper's bullet, disappearing into the snow. The young soldier kept his head down, moving silently, rifle at the ready, scanning for movement, listening for the slightest hint of danger. Survival demanded awareness, focus, and an almost inhuman level of resilience. The first hours of the Ardennes were a brutal introduction to combat, a test of endurance, and a stark reminder that in war, nothing could be taken for granted. By the time the first night passed, he was already mentally and physically exhausted. Yet the real trial, the 72-hour battle for survival, had only just begun. By the morning of December 17th, Francis A. Morgan had already endured nearly a full day of relentless combat. Exhaustion weighed heavily on his body, yet there was no opportunity for rest. His unit had been tasked with holding a small village at a strategic crossroads, a location the Germans were desperate to seize. The forest surrounding the village was dense, with snow-laden trees concealing the enemy's approach. Every sound, the crunch of boots on snow, the snapping of a branch, or even the howl of the wind became a potential threat. Fatigue had dulled his senses slightly, but Morgan relied on instinct and experience gained during the first night. Movement was slow and painstaking. Each step through the snow was laborious, boots sinking into drifts that reached mid-calf. His fingers were stiff from the cold, making it difficult to load ammunition and adjust his rifle sights. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but the meager rations he carried were to be rationed carefully. He ate sparingly, knowing that every calorie could be vital in the hours ahead. Around him, the village was in chaos. Buildings were damaged from shelling, streets littered with debris, and smoke from burning homes hung low over the snow. The Germans pressed forward relentlessly, probing the defenses with both infantry and armored vehicles. Morgan's unit set up defensive positions behind walls, fallen trees, and overturned carts. Sniper fire from concealed positions kept everyone on edge. When the enemy advanced, small firefights erupted in the streets and woods, punctuated by the roar of artillery and the crack of rifles. Morgan engaged in multiple encounters, returning fire while attempting to remain unseen. He could hear the cries of the wounded nearby and the frantic commands of his officers as they coordinated counterattacks. Every movement, every decision could mean life or death. As hours passed, hallucinations began to creep in. The exhaustion, combined with the bitter cold and unrelenting stress, made shadows appear to move on their own. Shapes in the trees transform into threats that were not there. Yet Morgan forced himself to focus, ignoring the whispers of his own mind and concentrating on the immediate danger. The line between day and night blurred as the Germans launched repeated attacks. Each time he engaged, adrenaline surged, pushing him beyond his physical limits. Every firefight was a test of endurance. Every victory, no matter how small, was a lifeline. By the evening of the second day, Morgan and his comrades were beginning to feel the true weight of sleep deprivation. Eyelids burned, muscles trembled, and fingers felt numb, yet retreat was impossible. The German offensive was relentless, and holding the crossroads was critical. His unit coordinated small counterattacks, pushing back enemy patrols and reclaiming positions lost during earlier engagements. The snow became slick with ice and blood, creating treacherous footing. Fear, adrenaline, and determination fused together, sustaining him through the night. During one intense encounter, Morgan found himself separated from his unit in a narrow street, with German soldiers advancing from both sides. He ducked into a ruined building, scanning the shadows for movement. Rifle in hand, he returned fire when necessary, counting each shot carefully. Around him, the sounds of battle never ceased. Gunfire, explosions, and the groans of wounded men became a relentless symphony of chaos. Despite the unending danger, he pressed on, moving from cover to cover, never allowing himself a moment of vulnerability. By the end of the second night, Francis A. Morgan had surpassed 48 hours without rest. His mind was a haze of fatigue, fear, and determination, but he knew that giving in could be fatal. Each breath was a cloud of frost, every movement an exertion of pure willpower. The village still stood, the crossroads still in American hands, but the cost had been high. Comrades had fallen, supplies were dwindling, and the threat of German reinforcements loomed. Yet Morgan survived, driven by instinct, training, and an unshakable desire to endure. By the dawn of December 20th, Francis A. Morgan had finally endured more than 72 hours without sleep. His body was on the brink of collapse. Frostbite had claimed several fingers and toes. His muscles ached from continuous exertion, and every joint in his body screamed with pain. Yet he had survived. The crossroads remained in American hands, a strategic victory that had held despite the relentless German offensive. Around him, the battlefield was a frozen graveyard, the snow stained red with blood, littered with abandoned equipment, broken artillery, and the bodies of both friends and foes. The weight of survival settled heavily on his mind. The faces of fallen comrades haunted him, each a reminder of how fragile life had become under such conditions. Yet he also carried the image of courage and heroism, the medic dragging a wounded soldier to safety under fire, a fellow soldier covering their retreat from enemy fire, the small victories that had kept hope alive. In those 72 hours, Morgan had witnessed the full spectrum of human endurance: fear, despair, bravery, and determination. The ordeal had stripped everything away except for the pure instinct to survive. As medical personnel reached the front line, Morgan was treated for frostbite, minor shrapnel wounds, and exhaustion. The sensation of warmth returning to his fingers and toes was almost surreal, a sharp contrast to the icy grip that had accompanied him through days of relentless battle. The soldiers around him were similarly broken but alive. Many had barely managed to hold their positions, and some would never see home again. Morgan realized that survival was a rare gift in the chaos of war, and the value of human life had never been clearer. During debriefing, he learned that the strategic crossroads they had held had prevented a major breakthrough by the Germans, delaying their advance and buying precious time for reinforcements to arrive. Every second spent fighting, moving, and resisting exhaustion had contributed directly to the larger Allied effort. Morgan had endured what few could imagine, facing an enemy intent on destruction while battling the limits of his own body and mind. The events of those 3 days had forged a new understanding of endurance, resilience, and human potential under extreme circumstances. Yet even after treatment and temporary rest, the psychological impact was profound. Morgan replayed the events in his mind repeatedly: the constant snow, the howling wind, the crack of artillery, the screams of the wounded, the sudden silence between skirmishes, and the eerie hallucinations that had crept in during moments of extreme exhaustion. Sleep deprivation had altered his perception of reality, forcing him to distinguish between true threats and imagined ones. Despite the trauma, he had adapted, learned, and survived. His mind, like his body, had endured the unendurable. Returning to camp, Morgan observed the human cost of the Ardennes offensive. Entire units had been decimated, supply lines disrupted, and towns left in ruins. Yet amidst the devastation, he also witnessed extraordinary acts of courage and camaraderie. Soldiers shared meager rations, provided cover for one another, and sacrificed personal safety to ensure that others survived. Morgan reflected on these moments, understanding that survival in war was never solitary. It depended on unity, trust, and shared determination. Over the coming days, he would regain some physical strength, but the memory of those 72 hours would remain vivid. Morgan realized that in the most extreme circumstances, human beings are capable of extraordinary endurance. The ordeal had taught him that survival is not only about physical stamina, but also about mental resilience, adaptability, and the ability to act under pressure when every fiber of your being screams to stop. The Battle of the Bulge raged on, but for Francis A. Morgan, those 72 hours became a defining moment of his service, a crucible that tested his limits and revealed the raw, unyielding spirit necessary to endure war. He returned home after the conflict with stories few could imagine, a testament to human resilience and the brutal realities of combat. For him, survival had become an act of both instinct and willpower, a reminder that sometimes the greatest battle is not against the enemy, but against the limitations of one's own body and mind. In the end, Morgan carried more than the scars of war. He carried the memory of fallen comrades, the terror of relentless combat, and the extraordinary capacity of the human body and mind to endure. His story serves as a vivid reminder of the courage, endurance, and sacrifice of those who faced the unimaginable during the Battle of the Bulge. And it stands as a testament to the indomitable spirit of soldiers who refuse to surrender, no matter how dire the circumstances. As the night stretched on, Francis A. Morgan understood a stark truth. In war, endurance was as vital as courage. The mind and body could be pushed to unimaginable extremes, and survival required navigating a blur of reality and hallucination, hope, and terror. The first 72 hours had been a trial by fire, a test of human limits that few would ever witness firsthand. By the early hours of December 19th, Morgan had now surpassed 72 hours without sleep. Every movement felt like wading through a fog of exhaustion, yet the battle showed no sign of slowing. His unit had received orders to mount a counterattack to reclaim a section of the crossroads briefly lost to German forces. The roads and surrounding forest were littered with debris, destroyed vehicles, and the fallen, both American and German. The snow, once pristine, was now a treacherous mixture of ice, mud, and blood. Each step a struggle against both terrain and sheer fatigue. The counterattack required precise coordination. Small squads advanced in staggered formations, using the remnants of shattered walls, trees, and trenches as cover. Morgan moved with his unit, crouched low, rifle ready, eyes scanning every shadow. German snipers and patrols lurked everywhere. The slightest misstep could mean death. Each engagement was fierce and chaotic, with bursts of gunfire punctuated by artillery explosions. Despite trembling hands and numb fingers, he squeezed the trigger with deliberate precision, firing only when necessary, conserving ammunition for moments that truly mattered. Communication was critical. Officers shouted orders through the roar of battle, while soldiers relayed messages with hand signals or shouted over the wind. Morgan noticed small tactical patterns in enemy movement. Flanks left exposed, soldiers advancing in predictable intervals. Using this knowledge, he assisted in flanking maneuvers, picking off advancing enemies while staying out of sight. The counterattack slowly regained lost ground, Morgan's adrenaline momentarily pushing back the crushing weight of exhaustion. During one engagement, Morgan found himself providing cover for a medic attending to a wounded comrade in the open. German bullets whizzed past, striking snow and timber around him. Each second stretched unbearably long as he focused on the sounds of movement, the faint crack of rifles and the distant thrum of artillery. The medic succeeded, dragging the injured man to safety, and Morgan pressed on, realizing that survival was as much about protecting others as it was about self-preservation. Small victories like this fueled the morale of the unit, keeping them moving forward despite near-impossible conditions. The German forces attempted to regroup and counterattack, but the combined resilience of the American soldiers held firm. Each foot of ground reclaimed was a testament to their endurance and determination. Morgan felt a strange detachment, almost as if his body was operating independently from his mind. He continued to advance fire and move with purpose, driven not by thought but by sheer instinct. Every step forward, every shot fired, was a victory over both the enemy and the physical limitations his body desperately wanted to enforce. By nightfall, the crossroads remained firmly under American control. Francis A. Morgan, despite frostbitten fingers, bruises, and the crushing weight of fatigue, had survived. His unit, though battered and reduced in numbers, had succeeded in repelling repeated German advances. As he huddled briefly behind a wall of debris, surveying the snow-strewn battlefield, he realized that endurance, courage, and tactical precision had combined to stave off disaster. The night offered only a fleeting reprieve, a moment to catch his breath before the next wave of challenges, yet it was a hard-earned reminder of human resilience under the most extreme conditions.